A diverse group of artists with a connection to Dorchester have their work on exhibit at UMass Boston. The exhibit in University Hall continues through March 13th. Our guest is one of the contributors, a graduate of the Yale School of Art and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Marlon Forrester. Thank you very much for being with us, Marlon.
Well, thank you for having me, Chris.
Marlon, this is an exhibit about at least part of Boston. How does your work comment on that?
Well, I think being a Bostonian, the experience of having an opportunity to showcase my work at UMass Boston is an amazing opportunity for me, not only just to talk about, painting and drawing, but also to just show my inspiration. So a lot of my work is based around athletics and sports, and it deals with basketball from the perspective of ritual. How do those symbols make and create manhood and shift and change culture?
I see a basketball game. I'm looking at sports, shooting and fouling and whatever. Yeah. But you're looking at things like geometry and colors. What do you read in that?
Well, one of the things I read in that is that basketball as a sport is definitely based around African symbols and images, right? The high five is a very, African gesture, because America itself kind of brings in all these different cultures and it's kind of a melting pot. And so even, the dunk itself is very ecstatic gesture, and that relates to African culture and the fusion of that. And the geometry within the basketball courts, those things can be seen as a space of ritual and making manhood.
There was one work you did where I saw the netting from the hoop, and it sounds like a spider's web.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I think one of the things about, the game is that it also leads to abstraction, right? There are some moves that are intuitive, and even in my work, there's that kind of intuitive processing. So it means that it leads to abstraction. So you may see some things in there that I might not interpret, but it's real to you.
Now, when you're working this up, are you actually going to maybe some courts with a sketchbook and thinking, or is this a little bit more abstracted?
Well, one of the things is that at Yale, we looked at ideas around the Bauhaus, which is like a German or aesthetic movement around art. So I'm looking at those forms, and I've deconstructed them, right, to kind of reconstruct them so that they can have new meaning for me. So I'm thinking about the outer peripheries of the court. I'm thinking about the free throw line. I'm thinking about the half court. How those symbols and those shapes come together to create language.
Chris, the other thing about basketball, as much as we might get excited about other team sports, this game looks so choreographed. Do you see that too? I
see some choreography, but then I also think about, the amazing Celtics that we have our team. You look at how Jalen, Brown will, look to take a defender, to the left and swing to the right. That's kind of intuitive, but he's also practiced that. And I think for me, that's a part of my passion of the work, is showing that my hand, as well as these figures that I embed, all about kind of manifesting this kind of ecstatic experience of watching the game.
This has been a newsroom. We're talking about the Dot Now exhibit at UMass Boston with artist Marlon Forrester. Marlon, your interesting background, you went to Boston Latin, but reaching further back, you're originally from Guyana. How does that influence your work?
I think coming from, the Diaspora, and specifically coming from Guyana, there's many different ethnic groups. There are about 4 different ethnic groups. There are Black, who came obviously through slave the passage. There's also Indian, Asian, and white, and there's been Dutch and British influence there too as well. So in my work, it's kind of like a melting pot, right? Taking some of those ideas around those different cultures and re-embedding them into my work now. So I have some paintings and large installations that I've worked on that deal with the idea of collective consciousness and addressing questions around identity and space.
I think it's fair to say that all artists recycle foundational elements in a way. You have the museum art culture.
Yeah.
What about a more sort of a vernacular art culture? Is that something you draw from too, even from Guyana?
Yeah, one of the things that I really pull from is the idea of, the not just abstraction, but in African imagery, there is something called that in jazz, for instance, I'll use that as a reference, as a way to make a connection. In jazz, when someone scats, that's that moment where the artist says, you know what, I'm gonna break against that order. And for me, I call it disequilibrium. And actually, I've been selected to create this large-scale public installation. I've been selected to revamp or redesign the DeWitt Playground and for the city of Boston, and that's directly behind Madison Park. And that's a project that I'll be working with Studio Luz Architects and the Boston office, City of Boston Architects too as well, to redesign.
Now, I know this is where elements, even a part of an element has a life of its own,
Yeah.
but there's also something here about manhood and dealing with limits, at least in the basketball works.
Yeah.
What were you thinking of?
For me, I was thinking about the idea that each of us has a manifested kind of destiny in a way. And I think that the idea of winning and losing is always a tension. It goes back to the history. If you look at the work of Ovid, or you look at early poets, whether it's Greek and Romans, there's this question about winning and losing and paying your dues in a way. So there's very much a part of the game, paying your dues and then excelling to another level in some way.
Well, your work has many different people who've contributed to it over the years, some of them even beyond the role of artists themselves.
Yeah.
And one of them that we're celebrating this week is Chuck Turner.
Yeah.
Tell me about his contribution, your contact with him.
Chuck Turner has been amazing. I'm actually part of AMAR, which is the African American Masters Artist Residency Program. And he has been working with us in such an amazing way with the city of Boston and Northeastern. So I really thank him for his leadership in the community and the legacy that he's left behind.
All right, well, thank you very much. Before we go, we should mention that if people want to check out your work or some information on the exhibit, is there some place they can find that?
Yeah, they can definitely go to they can go to UMass Boston, and they can definitely check out the gallery show there. They can also go online. I have a website. It's called www.marlonforrester.com. They can also Facebook me and Instagram me at Marlon Forrester as well.
Thank you very much for being with us.
So thank you.
Marlon Forrester. We'll have more news in just a moment.